The night settled over the camp like a heavy cloth, black and close and breathing with danger. Torches burned in long, uneven lines across the hills, their flames bending whenever the wind moved through the valley. Beneath them, men crouched beside cook fires and sharpened spearheads, their faces half lit and half lost in shadow. Horses shifted restlessly, their tack clinking softly in the dark. Somewhere beyond the outer ring of guards, messengers rode through mud and rain with orders that might never reach the right hands in time. This was not a world that believed in peace. It was a world that measured value in borders held, rivers crossed, cities seized, and enemies made to kneel. Kingdoms watched one another with suspicion so constant it had become a kind of weather. A ruler could wake as a neighbor and sleep as a target. A single failure in judgment could mean famine, collapse, massacre, and the end of a line that had ruled for generations. China, in the age that would shape Sun Tzu, was not one nation, but a broken field of ambitions. States rose behind walls, sent armies across plains, and counted survival, one campaign at a time. The old order had cracked. Authority had leaked away from the center. What remained was pressure, hunger, and fear. Every court contained men who spoke of honor, but the language beneath all others was urgency. In such an age, strength alone was never enough. A larger army could still be outmaneuvered. A brave commander could still be lured into disaster. A ruler could spend a fortune preparing for one season of war and lose everything in a single afternoon if the terrain turned against him, if supplies failed, if morale broke, if the enemy saw first what he had not yet understood. Victory was no longer a matter of shouting louder than the other side. It belonged to the mind that could see the whole field before anyone else did. That was the dangerous edge of Sun Tzu's thought. He did not arrive with a sword raised high and a face hardened by glory. He arrived as a strategist, a man whose power came from reading the hidden shape of conflict. The battlefield, in his view, was not simply a place where men collided. It was the final result of decisions made long before the first arrow flew. A war could be won in the silence before armies moved, in the confusion of an opponent, in the discipline of one's own troops, in the choice not to strike when haste would have seemed more heroic. That idea would have sounded almost offensive to many rulers of the age. In a culture that praised courage, Sun Tzu suggested that restraint could be superior to rage. In a time that glorified visible triumph, he argued that the highest triumph might leave no corpses behind at all. In a world obsessed with conquest, he insisted that the wiser course was often to shape events so completely that battle became unnecessary. This was not softness, it was severity of a different kind. To win without fighting demanded ruthless clarity. It required intelligence, patience, discipline, and an understanding of human weakness sharper than any blade. It required knowing when an enemy was proud, when he was afraid, when he was isolated, when he was overconfident, when his supply lines stretched too far, when his generals disagreed, when his allies were uncertain, when a promise could fracture a coalition better than a siege tower could breach a wall. Sun Tzu treated war as a living puzzle of pressure points and mistakes, and that is why his reputation endured. Long after the camps were abandoned and the banners rotted away, the logic remained. His words would outlast the kingdoms that first heard them. His ideas would travel farther than his armies ever did. Generals would copy him, merchants would borrow him, politicians would quote him, and modern leaders would still return to him whenever they needed language for competition, deception, timing, and control. But none of that matters yet to the people huddled in the cold before dawn. For them, the coming morning is not philosophy. It is risk. It is whether the gate holds, whether the messenger arrives, whether the enemy attacks the left flank before sunrise, whether the general makes the right call at the exact second when certainty vanishes. It is the fragile line between order and ruin. That is where Sun Tzu's story begins. Not in a library, but in a world where every decision had consequences sharp enough to cut. And before his ideas could be understood, before his name could become famous, before his book could cross centuries and borders, China itself had to descend deeper into the kind of instability that made his wisdom necessary. But before Sun Tzu could teach rulers how to avoid disaster, the age around him had to become a disaster first. The next chapter turns from the torchlit camp to the wider world behind it. Broken dynasties, rival states, vanishing loyalties, and a civilization learning that survival now belonged to those who could think faster than the enemy could march. Before Sun Tzu could become a name that echoed across centuries, the world around him had to become unstable enough to need him. Ancient China did not fall apart all at once. It frayed. Authority loosened thread by thread until the old center could no longer hold the edges together. What had once been a kingdom bound by ritual obligation and inherited order slowly transformed into a hard, restless landscape of competing states, each one watching the others for weakness. The great houses that had once answered to the Zhou kings began to behave like rulers in their own right. Titles remained, ceremonies remained, but beneath the formal surface, the old unity was already gone. This was not simply political change, it was a civilizational breakdown. The broad shape of the land mattered. On a map, China was not yet an empire, but a patchwork of rival powers spread across rivers, plains, mountains, and fortified frontiers. Each state occupied a different pressure point. Each had its own strengths, anxieties, and ambitions. To the west, some regions leaned on cavalry and open ground. To the east, coastal and river states watched trade routes and marshy borders. Inland, the larger kingdoms strained against their neighbors, each one trying to outlast the others through force, alliances, marriages, betrayal, and timing. A simple map of the age would look less like a nation and more like a wound marked by competing claims. That matters, because Sun Tzu's thinking was born inside that kind of fractured space. He did not write for a world where peace was assumed. He wrote for a world where peace was a temporary condition, the pause between two threats. The stakes for every ruler were severe. A king who lost a battle did not merely lose territory. He lost prestige, leverage, labor, tax revenue, food, roads, and the confidence of his own court. A defeated state could be stripped of influence so thoroughly that its enemies would begin dividing the spoils before the smoke had cleared. Cities could be besieged until hunger broke them. Noble families could be destroyed, advisors could be executed, alliances could vanish overnight. A campaign was not just a military event, it was a test of whether an entire political order deserved to keep existing. That is why the rulers of the age became obsessed with strategy. They needed men who could see beyond bravery. They needed men who understood supply routes, terrain, morale, and timing. They needed men who knew that a force of 50,000 could be made useless by bad weather, confused command, and exhausted soldiers. They needed minds that could turn uncertainty into advantage. In such a world, the most valuable commander was not necessarily the one who fought hardest. It was the one who understood how to make the enemy wrong before the fighting began. The old heroic language of war had begun to fail. Courage still mattered, but courage alone could not feed an army. Honor still mattered, but honor did not expose an ambush. Loyalty still mattered, but loyalty could be shattered by poor leadership or a starving camp. Sun Tzu's age exposed the limits of tradition. Kingdoms that relied only on inherited prestige discovered that prestige could be trampled by a better plan. The world had become too dangerous for illusions. Some states responded by becoming larger, harsher, and more organized. Bureaucracies grew, tax systems tightened, armies became more disciplined, law hardened into control. The logic of survival pushed rulers toward centralization, toward administration, toward a state that could mobilize resources faster than its rivals. This transformation was not gentle. It produced a new political seriousness, one that treated every field, river crossing, and granary as part of the war machine. For ordinary people, this was a world of constant cost. Farmers were pressed for grain and labor. Families watched sons vanish into conscription. Merchants tried to survive between military demands and shifting borders. Cities fortified themselves and still slept uneasily. A road could be safe one season and deadly the next. A river crossing could determine whether a kingdom lived or died. Even weather became strategic. Rain, frost, drought, and mud all influenced whether an army could move or whether it would collapse under its own weight. This is the emotional landscape that gives Sun Tzu's ideas their force. His philosophy did not emerge from comfort. It emerged from instability so severe that every ruler had reason to fear the next season. And yet collapse has a strange habit. It produces not only destruction, but innovation. When old assumptions no longer work, people search for new rules. When battles become too expensive, leaders ask how to win with fewer losses. When armies become too large to manage by instinct alone, they turn to planning. When enemies become too clever to meet head-on, deception becomes respectable. This is the atmosphere that made a strategist like Sun Tzu possible. He belonged to a civilization that was learning, painfully, that survival required intelligence equal to violence. A simple timeline of the period helps show the pressure building across generations. First comes the weakening of the Zhou center. Then comes the rise of regional rulers with real autonomy. Then comes widening conflict as ambitious states begin swallowing smaller neighbors. Then comes the ruthless refinement of war itself as rulers recruit thinkers who can turn chaos into method. By the time Sun Tzu appears in the story, the age is already primed to receive a man who can explain how to think inside a battlefield without being consumed by it. That is the deeper reason his work mattered. He was not inventing conflict, he was translating it. He gave rulers a language for what they were already living through: pressure, uncertainty, speed, deception, morale, terrain, discipline, and the fragile difference between a bold decision and a catastrophic one. The collapse around him was not a background detail, it was the furnace. And in that furnace, a mysterious figure began to take shape, one whose life would be shadowed by questions from the start. The kingdoms began falling into rivalry, the courts started sharpening their ambitions, and the age was becoming harsh enough to reward a new kind of mind. Out of that instability comes the next question. Who, exactly, was Sun Tzu? The farther back the story of Sun Tzu is traced, the more the ground begins to disappear beneath the feet. Unlike kings who left temples, tombs, and long lists of descendants, Sun Tzu stands in the historical record like a figure seen through mist. There is a name. There is a book. There are stories. There are later historians who treat him as real, and modern scholars who still debate how much of the legend can be tied to a single man. That uncertainty is part of his power. He enters history not with the certainty of a throne, but with the uneasy outline of a shadow moving across a battlefield. What can be said with confidence is that he belonged to a world where military expertise was becoming one of the highest forms of political value. Courts no longer had the luxury of trusting inherited nobility alone. A ruler who wished to survive needed advisors who could calculate, adapt, and predict. In such a climate, a strategist could rise quickly if he proved himself useful enough. Birth mattered, but results mattered more. That simple fact explains why a man like Sun Tzu could matter at all. His origins are usually associated with the late spring and autumn period, a time when China's political order was splintering into a contest of regional power. Whether he came from the state of Qi, or whether later tradition attached him there because it fit the logic of the age, the association places him near one of the most intellectually charged regions of ancient China. Qi had a reputation, wealth, and a court culture that valued serious thought. In that environment, a man who studied war as a system rather than a series of heroic clashes would not have seemed strange. He would have seemed useful. The uncertainty around his life has led some to imagine him as a single, clearly defined individual, and others to suspect that the name may have gathered together the work of several strategists across time. Yet even that possibility does not weaken the story. It only makes it larger. If Sun Tzu was more than one man, then the figure remembered by history became a vessel for a generation's hard-won knowledge about survival. If he was one man, then he was exceptional enough to shape the thought of centuries. Either way, the legacy stands. What mattered most was not the exact shape of his family tree. It was the kind of intelligence his age demanded. He lived in a period where rulers needed more than courage from their commanders. They needed men who understood how to read a courtroom like a battlefield and a battlefield like a courtroom. They needed someone who could sense where power was brittle. They needed someone who knew that fear could be more decisive than steel. That kind of insight does not emerge from calm conditions. It grows in dangerous places. Imagine the environment that formed him. Courtyards full of suspicion, officials speaking carefully because the wrong sentence could end a career, borderlands where scouts carried information faster than armies carried weapons, and rulers who rewarded success but rarely forgave failure. A man who grew intelligent in such an age would learn early that appearances could deceive, that enemies could hide behind formal diplomacy, and that the loudest person in a room was not necessarily the most dangerous one. Sun Tzu's philosophy reflects exactly that kind of education. His thought is filled with the logic of hidden advantage. He favors movement over rigidity, calculation over impulse, and indirect pressure over direct collision. That is the mind of someone shaped by unstable politics. It is also the mind of someone who has watched too many proud men lose everything because they mistook confidence for wisdom. The ancient sources that preserve Sun Tzu's memory do not offer the comfort of a complete biography. They give fragments, and those fragments are enough to create tension. A strategist appears, a ruler notices him. A military test follows, the man proves himself, the state benefits, and behind all of it is the same question that follows every legendary figure whose life has been partly swallowed by time. How much of the story is history? And how much is the shape history gives to memory after the fact? That question matters because Sun Tzu is not remembered as a poet or a priest. He is remembered as someone who changed the way power thinks. That means later generations had reason to smooth his image, sharpen his lessons, and turn him into the perfect author for a perfect theory of victory. The result is a figure that may be more complete in influence than in detail. His life is uncertain, but the force of his ideas is not. He seems to have understood something that many leaders only learn after defeat, that a commander's greatest task is not to glorify war, but to control it. The battle does not begin when the armies meet. It begins in the mind of the ruler, in the quality of his intelligence, in the discipline of his troops, in the reliability of his information, in the mood of his court, and in the enemy's ability to guess correctly what will happen next. Sun Tzu's own life may be difficult to reconstruct, but the world that shaped him is clear enough to explain why his ideas took root. There is also something fitting in the mystery itself. A man who argued that the highest mastery is invisible survives best when he is not fully seen. His own obscurity echoes his teaching. He becomes difficult to pin down, difficult to simplify, difficult to reduce. The legend survives because it keeps moving. And then comes the moment when shadow turns into action. One ruler, ambitious and surrounded by danger, is said to have tested this strategist in a way that would become one of the most famous episodes in military history. In that court, ideas would not be judged by elegance. They would be judged by obedience, discipline, and consequence. The next chapter leaves behind uncertain origins and enters a scene of pressure so sharp it could break a lesser man. The identity of Sun Tzu remains blurred at the edges, but the force of his reputation begins to sharpen the moment he steps into a royal court where words alone are no longer enough. The next chapter opens on one of the most dramatic tests of authority in ancient history, where a king wants proof, a strategist demands discipline, and the difference between theory and command becomes impossible to ignore. The court of Wu was built on power, but power there was not a calm thing. It trembled, it watched itself, it waited for embarrassment, treachery, and failure to reveal who was truly in control. That is why the arrival of Sun Tzu became more than a meeting between a strategist and a ruler. It became a test of whether authority meant anything at all. King Helu of Wu had reason to be ambitious. His state stood in a world where ambitious kings either expanded or disappeared. To the south and west, stronger rivals pressed in. To survive, Wu needed more than size. It needed intelligence sharp enough to cut through stronger enemies. So when Sun Tzu appeared, carrying a theory of war that sounded severe, disciplined, and strangely unemotional, the king listened. Then he decided to test him. The test, according to the famous tradition, was not placed on a battlefield first. It was placed in the royal household, in the inner world of the court, where appearance, obedience, and control could be judged in miniature before being trusted on a national scale. The king brought forth his concubines and ordered Sun Tzu to drill them as soldiers. The scene must have carried a strange tension. A strategist trained for war stood before women of the palace, surrounded by guards and noble observers, while a king who was half curious and half skeptical watched to see whether this outsider would truly act like a commander or merely speak like one. The concubines, used to luxury and privilege, may have smiled at the absurdity of the whole affair. If so, that smile would not last long. Sun Tzu gave his orders. He explained them carefully. He asked for discipline. He demonstrated the movement, yet the women laughed and failed to obey with seriousness. In another court, a lesser man might have tried again and lost his authority piece by piece until the room itself decided he was a fraud. Sun Tzu chose a different path. He made the structure of command visible. If a commander's orders could be ignored without consequence, then an army would dissolve the first time danger arrived. If the rules were not absolute in training, they would be useless in battle. Sun Tzu understood that obedience could not be improvised under fire. It had to be established before the fire ever came. So when the concubines continued to treat the exercise like a game, he made the point unmistakable. He enforced the logic of command all the way to its most severe conclusion. The story's meaning is not in the shock alone. It is in what the shock revealed. Sun Tzu was teaching that leadership must be real before it can be admired. A commander who cannot make his orders matter in a palace will not make them matter on a battlefield. Discipline, in his world, was not a decorative virtue. It was survival. The king had asked a question with his eyes. Can this man control troops? Sun Tzu answered by proving that control without consequence is only theater. And that is why the story became legendary. It turns a philosophy into a scene. It shows authority being tested not by words, but by behavior. It also reveals something uncomfortable about the age itself. Ancient warfare did not reward kindness first. It rewarded certainty, structure, and the ability to make a force act as one. Sun Tzu's harshness was not random cruelty. It was a demonstration of what happens when command is allowed to weaken. In war, hesitation could kill more people than firmness ever would. The king, if the tradition is followed, understood the lesson. The court saw that this strategist was not interested in pleasing people. He was interested in making them effective. That difference mattered. Armies do not win because they feel inspired for a moment. They win because they are trained into a pattern that survives confusion. Sun Tzu's demonstration turned a living room of privilege into a lesson about the anatomy of defeat. There is also an important emotional edge to the episode. A king who trusted the wrong man could lose his throne. A strategist who failed this trial could lose his life. That danger sharpened everything. The women, too, became part of a larger mechanism of proof. Their laughter was not merely disrespect. It was the moment the court learned that the rules of war do not bend to comfort. The whole story lives because it compresses a civilization's military values into one unforgettable performance. What makes the episode endure is not just the severity, but the precision. Sun Tzu did not rage. He instructed. He did not rely on charisma. He relied on structure. He did not ask the king for faith. He demonstrated consequence. The scene becomes, in miniature, the larger argument of his entire philosophy. Clarity matters more than sentiment, and a command that cannot be enforced is already dead. With that test completed, Sun Tzu moved from theory to influence. The king had seen that the strategist could impose order where others saw only amusement. Now the true question emerged. Could that same discipline reshape an army large enough to challenge the powers around Wu? The answer would be written not in a palace, but in campaigns, terrain, and blood. The court had given Sun Tzu its test and learned that his authority was not ceremonial. Now the story leaves the inner chambers and moves to the wider landscape of Wu, where rivers, borders, supply lines, and rival states would reveal whether discipline could become power. The next chapter follows the strategist as his ideas begin to meet geography, and as a vulnerable kingdom starts to turn itself into a weapon. Wu did not begin as the obvious kingdom of destiny. On a map of ancient China, it sat at the edge of the larger political struggle, lower and eastern, shaped by waterways, marshes, border crossings, and the long anxiety of being smaller than the giants around it. It was not the most overwhelming power. It was not the most famous. It was not the kingdom that inspired immediate awe. And yet that was exactly why it mattered. Wu had something dangerous that larger states often lost: hunger. A small or threatened state cannot afford to drift. Every decision feels expensive. Every mistake becomes visible. Every season can alter the balance between survival and collapse. That pressure shaped the kingdom's character. It made Wu receptive to commanders who understood that war was not a display of force, but a contest of nerve, timing, and preparation. Sun Tzu's arrival in that environment was like introducing a blade into a machine that had not yet learned how to cut properly. The kingdom needed more than courage. It needed organization. It needed a military that could move quickly, receive orders cleanly, and keep its shape when fear entered the line. It needed a ruler willing to trust strategy over instinct. In many courts, that would have been impossible. Rulers preferred flattering voices, dramatic promises, and easy victories. Sun Tzu offered none of that. He offered structure, discipline, and the cold insistence that war rewarded the prepared, not the merely enthusiastic. The road to power in Wu was therefore not built on spectacle. It was built step by step, like the drawing of a campaign map. First, the borders had to be understood. Then the enemy's habits had to be studied. Then the terrain had to be read with the same care a scholar might bring to a text. Rivers were not just water. They were barriers, routes, and traps. Hills were not just geography. They were leverage. Roads were not neutral. They were arteries through which grain, troops, and messages had to pass. A commander who understood these things could turn a map into a weapon. This is where Sun Tzu's thought began to feel less like philosophy and more like engineering. A simple map of the kingdom would show not a single front line, but a network of pressures. There were borders to defend, allies to manage, enemy states to watch, internal officials to coordinate, and supply systems to protect. A mistake in any one area could weaken the whole. Sun Tzu understood that an army does not fight only at the moment of battle. It fights every day before the battle through preparation, logistics, morale, and intelligence. The camp, the road, the messenger, the granary, the weather report, the spy's warning, the general's restraint. Each of these mattered as much as the moment when weapons finally clashed. For Wu, this meant transformation. A state that had once been vulnerable could become dangerous if it learned to act with precision. Sun Tzu's methods gave Wu that possibility. He taught that speed mattered, but not reckless speed. He taught that deception mattered, but not theatrical deception. He taught that an army should move like water. Adaptable, difficult to pin down, and able to flow around obstacles rather than crashing uselessly against them. This was not weakness, it was efficiency sharpened into force. The rival powers around Wu could not ignore that shift. In the ancient world, neighbors watched one another constantly. A kingdom's military reforms were not private affairs. Scouts, traders, defectors, diplomats, and spies carried impressions across borders. If Wu was improving its discipline, strengthening its command structure, and becoming more difficult to predict, that information itself altered the strategic balance. An enemy that fears surprise begins to hesitate. An enemy that hesitates loses time. In war, time often means territory, morale, and survival. Sun Tzu's genius was not merely that he understood this, it was that he made it operational. He did not imagine war as two lines of men charging for glory. He imagined it as a system in which each side tried to shape the other's expectations. If a kingdom could be made to doubt its own strength, if its generals could be made to split their attention, if its troops could be made to feel isolated or trapped, then the enemy might collapse before the decisive collision ever happened. In that sense, the kingdom of Wu became a laboratory for his ideas. Every drill, every movement, every decision tested whether a smarter structure could overcome a stronger enemy. And the stakes were enormous. If Wu failed to modernize itself, it risked becoming another border kingdom absorbed by a larger rival. If it succeeded, it could do what small states rarely manage. It could force the great powers to treat it seriously. Sun Tzu's advice therefore carried the pressure of national survival. This was not abstract theory written for comfort. It was a blueprint for whether a kingdom would be remembered or erased. The emotional intensity of this moment lies in its uncertainty. The future had not yet chosen a winner. Wu was not guaranteed success. Its enemies were still formidable. Its ambitions could still collapse into overreach. A kingdom can sharpen itself into a weapon and still break in the hand that holds it. Sun Tzu knew that as well. That is why his methods stressed discipline not just in the army, but in the ruler's judgment. A reckless king could waste even the best strategy. A patient king, guided by accurate intelligence, could turn weakness into opportunity. That tension is part of what makes this moment feel alive. It is not merely that Wu became stronger. It is that every gain comes with risk. Expansion could provoke retaliation. Reform could create internal resistance. Victory could breed overconfidence. Sun Tzu's world never allowed triumph to become simple. Every success created a new danger. Yet Wu moved forward. Its roads became more meaningful, its generals more disciplined, its campaigns more deliberate. Its strategic culture began to change from one of brute pressure to one of calculation. A war council in Wu would no longer be only a place where men shouted about honor. It would become a place where the shape of terrain, the reliability of intelligence, and the morale of troops might decide the fate of thousands. That is the real road to power Sun Tzu helped build. Not a louder army, but a smarter one. And once a kingdom learns to think differently about war, it no longer merely defends itself, it begins to reach. Wu had been strengthened from within, but strength is only meaningful when it meets resistance. The next chapter leaves the controlled world of preparation and enters open conflict, where Sun Tzu's ideas would face their greatest test against the powerful state of Chu. What follows is not just a war, but the moment when theory collides with terrain, ambition, and the terrifying possibility that one miscalculation could undo everything. If Wu's rise had been a long inhale, the war against Chu was the exhale that could either break the kingdom or make it legendary. Chu was not a small enemy. It was vast, wealthy, and intimidating in both scale and reputation. On a map, Chu spread like an enormous dark shape across the south, its reach so wide that smaller states had to measure themselves against it the way travelers measured distance against a mountain range. It possessed depth in land, manpower, and confidence. It had the weight of a great power behind it. If Wu struck at Chu and failed, there would be no graceful retreat into obscurity. There would be retaliation, humiliation, and the likely destruction of everything Wu had built. That was the danger. And that danger is what makes Sun Tzu's campaigns against Chu feel so electric. This was not a war between equals. It was a contest between a smaller, sharper state and a giant that believed its size would protect it. Chu had presence, Wu had precision. Chu had breadth, Wu had timing. Chu could afford to feel broad and secure. Wu could not afford a single careless move. The landscape itself became part of the struggle. Rivers slowed armies, marshes swallowed momentum, roads carried not only soldiers but rumors, fear, and uncertainty. Hills hid movement, forests concealed scouts, every mile mattered. A good general could turn a landscape into an ally, a poor one could be trapped by it. Sun Tzu understood that the battlefield was never just a field. It was a living arrangement of pressure, distance, visibility, and risk. The campaign against Chu demanded all of that knowledge at once. There is something especially tense about a war where the smaller side chooses to attack. The decision feels almost impossible until one realizes that Sun Tzu's thinking had changed the meaning of attack itself. He did not treat assault as reckless aggression. He treated it as the final expression of preparation. If Chu could be made to misread Wu's intentions, if its generals could be forced into hesitation or overreaction, if its lines could be stretched and its attention split, then Wu might be able to strike not where Chu was strongest, but where it was exposed. That is the hidden drama of the war. It was never only about numbers. It was about perception. The enemy had to be made to believe the wrong thing at the wrong time. Sun Tzu's approach favored surprise, speed, and the careful use of pressure. He knew that the strongest army can become clumsy if it is too confident, and that a great state can become vulnerable if its leaders assume weakness when none exists. Chu had the danger of scale. Large systems are powerful, but they can also be slow to respond. Orders travel farther. Confusion spreads wider. A massive state often depends on the assumption that its sheer size will absorb shocks. Sun Tzu's genius was in designing shocks too precise to be absorbed cleanly. A simple campaign map of this conflict would show more than routes of march. It would show shifting attention. It would show feints designed to pull one force out of position while another advanced elsewhere. It would show the value of terrain that slowed a larger enemy and the importance of choosing engagements where Wu could control the terms. It would show that the battle was won in advance through information, coordination, and the willingness to move in ways Chu did not expect. The stories tied to this campaign emphasized that Sun Tzu's methods did not depend on heroic spectacle. They depended on making the enemy's strengths work against him. A large army that cannot maneuver is a burden. A proud commander who cannot interpret the enemy correctly becomes a liability. A ruler who trusts appearances too much can be baited into responding to the wrong threat. Sun Tzu's war against Chu thrived on these weaknesses. The emotional stakes for the men involved were immense. For Wu's soldiers, each advance carried the possibility of death, capture, or glory. For their families, every march threatened a future without sons, husbands, or fathers. For Chu's defenders, the invasion was not just an inconvenience, but a challenge to the dignity of a great state. A city under threat does not think in abstractions. It thinks in gates, granaries, walls, and the possibility that tomorrow's sunrise may bring smoke instead of safety. That is why the campaign feels so tense even through the centuries. The genius of Sun Tzu's method was that he understood fear as a force in its own right. Fear can paralyze, but it can also be directed. A commander who understands what the enemy fears most can shape the conflict before the first clash. Chu's size may have made it impressive, but size also made it difficult to watch every weakness at once. Wu did not need to crush Chu everywhere. It needed only to rupture the confidence that held Chu together. The famous accounts of this era describe Wu's victories as sharp and unsettling, the kind of advances that make a stronger enemy feel suddenly unsure of itself. That is the mark of true strategic success. The enemy is not simply defeated, the enemy is surprised into a new awareness of vulnerability. Once that happens, the war changes. Confidence becomes caution. Caution becomes delay. Delay becomes loss. And in that loss, Sun Tzu's thinking comes into full view. He had no interest in waste. He did not admire combat for its own sake. He treated battle as an instrument to be used only when conditions favored success. The war against Chu demonstrated that logic in a brutal and beautiful way. It showed that a state disciplined enough to prepare carefully could challenge a stronger one by forcing it into confusion. In that sense, the war was never really about swords or spears alone. It was about knowledge, timing, and the ability to shape another ruler's choices. That is the part of war that history often hides. Armies march under banners, but campaigns are won by invisible things. Confidence, deception, intelligence, fear, and the invisible strain between what leaders believe and what is actually true. Sun Tzu worked in that hidden space. He made uncertainty itself into a weapon. And when Chu finally recognized the threat, it was already late enough to be dangerous. The war had become proof. Not proof that Wu was the largest state, nor proof that brute force always failed, but proof that a smaller kingdom with a sharper mind could punish a greater one by understanding the battlefield more completely. That lesson would travel far beyond this one campaign. It would become one of the defining truths of Sun Tzu's legacy. Yet even after the smoke of battle thinned, his deepest idea remained untouched by any single victory. He was not only teaching how to fight, he was teaching how to think before fighting ever became necessary. The war against Chu proved that strategy could bend power in ways that size alone could not resist. But Sun Tzu's most unsettling lesson was still waiting beneath the victories. The next chapter moves beyond battlefield movement and into the colder, quieter center of his philosophy, where deception, discipline, psychology, and restraint reveal why his ideas outlived the war that first made them famous. Of all the ideas Sun Tzu left behind, none was stranger, sharper, or more enduring than this. The best victory is the one achieved before the enemy realizes a battle has begun. That single thought changes everything. In ordinary war, power announces itself loudly. Armies march, standards rise, drums thunder, cities brace for siege. But Sun Tzu looked beneath that spectacle and saw the machinery underneath it all. The fear, the uncertainty, the fragile trust between generals and soldiers, the slow movement of supplies, the exhaustion hidden under discipline, the arrogance that grows inside a confident court. He understood that by the time armies actually collide, much of the real contest is already over. That is why his philosophy feels almost unsettling. He does not celebrate destruction. He studies it. He measures the smallest shifts that decide whether a state survives or disappears. He asks what happens when one side knows more, moves faster, and chooses the ground more carefully than the other. He asks what happens when an enemy is made to doubt what he sees. He asks, what happens when a commander can force another commander to waste strength, split attention, or reveal himself too early? This is the heart of Sun Tzu's thinking. The battlefield is only the final page of a much longer story. In that story, deception is not an afterthought. It is central. But Sun Tzu's deception is not crude lying for its own sake. It is a strategic distortion. It is the art of causing the enemy to misread reality. If a force appears weak when it is actually strong, or strong when it is actually vulnerable, the opposing side may commit an error so large it cannot be corrected in time. A commander who believes he understands the situation may already be trapped by his own assumption. Sun Tzu knew that perception could kill armies long before steel did. His emphasis on intelligence follows naturally from that insight. A ruler cannot win what he cannot see. A general cannot command what he does not understand. Scouts, informants, defectors, local knowledge, weather, terrain, the mood of the troops, the confidence of the enemy, all of it mattered. In a simple diagram of Sun Tzu's battlefield, arrows and formations would be less important than invisible networks of information moving across the map. The real war runs through reports, rumors, timing, and interpretation. That is what makes his ideas feel so modern. He was not only describing ancient combat, he was describing competition itself. And competition is rarely decided where people expect. It is decided by preparation hidden from view, by timing nobody notices, by the quality of the decision made under pressure, by the discipline that keeps people from panicking when the moment turns uncertain. Sun Tzu believed that if one side could shape the enemy's choices while protecting its own, then battle might become unnecessary. That was not weakness, it was mastery. The strongest command is sometimes the one that never has to shout. There is also a moral tension running through this philosophy. Sun Tzu is often admired for his wisdom, but his wisdom is severe. He treats war like a system to be controlled, not a tragedy to be mourned. Yet that very coldness is part of what made his ideas durable. He was writing for rulers who had to survive. Survival demanded hard choices. It demanded the willingness to withhold praise from reckless bravery and to praise patience where others would have admired force. In his world, an impulsive victory could still cost more than a cautious stalemate. A glorious charge could destroy a kingdom. A carefully delayed strike could save one. That is why winning without fighting should never be mistaken for softness. It is a ruthless efficiency so complete that open war becomes the last resort rather than the first impulse. To achieve that kind of victory, a commander must understand not only weapons, but human nature. Pride, fear, fatigue, confusion, hope, vanity, loyalty. Sun Tzu treats all of these as tactical realities. A man's mind can be broken, redirected, fortified, or trapped. So can a state's. The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that Sun Tzu was not simply teaching how to conquer others. He was teaching how to avoid being conquered by circumstances. An overconfident ruler could be baited. A disorganized army could be exhausted into defeat. A state that ignored intelligence could be ambushed by its own blindness. His philosophy is a warning as much as a guide. It tells leaders that force is only one form of power, and often not the most efficient one. Sun Tzu would move from battlefield movement to psychological control. First would come discipline, then intelligence, and after, deception. From here comes the shaping of the enemy's expectations. Then comes the ideal condition in which the opponent is forced to yield before bloodshed becomes necessary. Each step becomes more refined, more hidden, more elegant, and in some ways more disturbing. The violence does not vanish. It is simply pushed backward into planning, into strategy, into the unseen architecture of power. That is the reason Sun Tzu remains impossible to reduce to a slogan. He is quoted endlessly, but his work is not really about neat sayings. It is about power under pressure, It is about the moment a commander realizes that the visible fight is only the surface of the true contest. It is about the advantage held by the leader who can remain calm while everyone else is rushing toward noise. And perhaps that is why his ideas outlived the world that produced them. Kings changed, dynasties changed, weapons changed, but human weakness did not. People still overestimate themselves. They still ignore warning signs. They still confuse movement with progress and confidence with wisdom. Sun Tzu survives because he wrote for the permanent flaws of power. He taught that an enemy defeated mentally is already half destroyed. He taught that armies can be maneuvered by fear as much as by force. He taught that the best war is often the one that ends before it begins. And in doing so, he transformed warfare from an act of raw collision into a discipline of thought. That lesson would not stay on the battlefield forever. It would move outward, crossing centuries, courts, empires, and cultures until it became part of the wider language of leadership itself. Sun Tzu's philosophy had already shown its power in war, but ideas do not survive merely because they are clever. They survive because they are written down, preserved, and carried forward by people who believe they still matter. The next chapter leaves the battlefield and turns to the book itself, tracing how the art of war became the vessel through which Sun Tzu's voice escaped its own age and began traveling toward the future. A book can outlive a kingdom. That is one of history's quieter miracles, and it is what happened with Sun Tzu's work. The battles that once filled the horizon of his age faded into dust. The commanders died, the borders shifted. The states that had once terrified one another were swallowed, renamed, unified, or forgotten. Yet the book remained. It survived because it carried something more durable than a record of one war. It carried a method of thinking. The art of war is brief enough to seem almost austere, but inside that brevity lives a world of discipline, pressure, timing, and control. It does not read like a heroic epic. It reads like a set of principles forged in the harsh light of necessity. Every line feels trimmed of waste. Every idea seems stripped down until only the essential remains. That economy is part of its power. Sun Tzu did not decorate his thought. He sharpened it. The structure itself matters. The work moves through 13 chapters, each one turning a different facet of conflict into instruction. It speaks of planning, warfare, attack, positioning, energy, weakness and strength, movement, terrain, variation, maneuvering, tactical adaptability, espionage, and the use of intelligence. These are not isolated observations. They form a connected logic. A ruler who understands one of them but ignores the others is only partly prepared. The book insists that war is a system, and systems fail when one part is misunderstood. That is why the text feels so modern when read carefully. It does not depend on chivalry, grandeur, or the romance of battle. It depends on analysis. It asks questions that are cold but necessary. What is the enemy's condition? What is the state of the land? What can be gained by waiting? What can be lost by rushing? Where is the pressure weakest? Where is the opponent blind? What can be learned before the first move is made? These questions give the book its enduring force, because they are the questions people still ask whenever stakes are high and certainty is low. A timeline of the text's survival would look almost like a relay race through history. One generation preserves it, another comment on it. Later, rulers consult it in war rooms. Scholars argue over its meaning. Scribes copy it. Military schools teach it. Commanders reinterpret it for new weapons, new states, and new crises. The book does not remain in one place. It migrates. And as it migrates, it gathers authority. Part of that authority comes from the simplicity of its form. Sun Tzu's ideas are not buried in sprawling arguments. They arrive cleanly, almost like maxims carved into stone. Yet that simplicity is deceptive. The more carefully the text is read, the more layered it becomes. A sentence about terrain becomes a lesson about logistics, morale, and timing. A warning about speed becomes a warning about exhaustion. A line about deception becomes a meditation on the fragility of perception. The book rewards repeated reading because it was built to work in different circumstances. It does not offer one rigid blueprint. It offers a way of seeing. That flexibility is exactly why leaders across centuries have claimed it. Some used it to fight wars. Some used it to avoid them. Some read it as practical military doctrine. Others read it as political wisdom. Later generations found in it a language for business, negotiation, espionage, and competition. It became one of those rare works that seems to belong to its own age and to every age after it. A general reads one chapter and sees a battlefield. A manager reads the same chapter and sees a rival company. A politician reads it and sees a campaign. A strategist reads it and sees human behavior itself. Ancient texts vanished all the time. Wars destroyed libraries. Dynasties burned records. Rebellions scattered archives. A work survived only if it was valued enough to be copied, taught, and protected. The art of war endured because rulers needed it, scholars respected it, and later generations recognized that it explained something too fundamental to lose. It survived because it was useful, and it remained useful because human conflict did not disappear. There is also a striking beauty in the book's voice. It is stern, but not loud. It is confident, but not boastful. It speaks like a man who has seen too many mistakes to admire noise. That tone helped create its authority. Sun Tzu does not sound as though he is performing wisdom. He sounds as though he is reporting hard-earned truths. The effect is profound. Readers feel they are being instructed by someone who understands how costly error can be. And behind the text is a deeper drama, the passage from lived experience to preserved knowledge. At one time, Sun Tzu's ideas may have circulated as practical advice in court and camp. Later, they became a text. Once written, they became something else again. Something portable enough to outlive the people who first needed them. The transition from command to manuscript is what transformed Sun Tzu from strategist into tradition. The transformation would show 3 stages. First, the battlefield, then the court, then the library. But that is too neat for the truth. In reality, the book moved constantly between those worlds. It was read by men preparing for war and by scholars reflecting on power. It was copied by scribes and used by rulers. It occupied the unstable space where thought becomes action. That is why it became one of the most influential military texts in history. Not because it glorified war, but because it exposed its mechanics. The book teaches that strength without understanding is fragile. It teaches that arrogance invites defeat. It teaches that intelligence may save more lives than heroism ever could. It teaches that a leader's first obligation is to see clearly. These ideas crossed dynasties because they were never tied to one battlefield. They belonged to the architecture of conflict itself. And yet the full story of Sun Tzu's influence does not stop with the text. A book preserved in one era can become a weapon in another. Ideas can travel farther than armies, and once they do, they begin to shape empires that the original author never lived to see. The art of war survived because later generations kept finding new uses for its hard-earned lessons. The next chapter follows that journey outward, across dynasties and centuries, as Sun Tzu's ideas move from ancient battlefields into the hands of emperors, generals, and rulers who believed they could still be made stronger by the same quiet logic that once guided Wu. Once the art of war entered the bloodstream of history, it stopped belonging to a single age. It became something more unstable, a living manual that different rulers could interpret in radically different ways. Some treated it as a battlefield guide. Others treated it as political philosophy. Others still read it as a mirror for human behavior under pressure. The same text could sit on the desk of an emperor planning conquest, a general preparing a defensive war, or a strategist shaping rebellion against an empire. What made this possible was not ambiguity, but adaptability. Sun Tzu did not write for one war. He wrote for the conditions that make war inevitable. Its influence would stretch across centuries like a chain of relays. One dynasty carries it forward, then another reinterprets it, then another applies it in a completely different environment shaped by new weapons, new borders, and new political realities. Yet the underlying logic remains recognizable. Understand the enemy, control perception, move with precision, avoid unnecessary loss, and shape outcomes before confrontation becomes unavoidable. During imperial periods, rulers often valued Sun Tzu's ideas not only for warfare, but for governance itself. An empire is not maintained by force alone. It is maintained by balance between central authority and regional control, between taxation and stability, between military strength and political legitimacy. Sun Tzu's emphasis on intelligence and positioning translated easily into the language of administration. A ruler who understood where pressure points existed in a state could prevent rebellion before it began. A court that understood internal rivalries could manage them rather than be consumed by them. Generals, meanwhile, saw in Sun Tzu a practical guide to survival on campaign. His teachings about terrain, logistics, timing, and morale became especially valuable in large, shifting empires where armies often marched farther than communication could reliably reach. A commander who ignored supply lines or underestimated geography could lose without ever meeting the enemy in open battle. Sun Tzu made those invisible factors visible. In later eras, his ideas traveled far beyond the borders of ancient China. Military thinkers in other cultures encountered the art of war and recognized its underlying structure, conflict as a system of information, movement, and psychology, rather than brute collision alone. The text's endurance in military academies around the world reflects this shift. It became a reference point whenever commanders needed to think about uncertainty, deception, and asymmetry. But perhaps the most striking transformations of Sun Tzu's legacy occurred not in imperial courts, but in moments of revolution. Revolutionary movements, by their nature, cannot rely on direct strength at the beginning. They often face established states with greater resources, larger armies, and deeper control over institutions. In such conditions, Sun Tzu's emphasis on indirect strategy becomes especially attractive. Avoiding direct confrontation, identifying weaknesses in the opponent's structure, creating uncertainty within established power, striking where the system is least prepared to respond. These principles resonate strongly in struggles where survival depends on outthinking a stronger opponent before it can fully react. This dynamic would appear asymmetrically as the central condition, one side heavy and established, the other flexible and adaptive. Sun Tzu's ideas consistently favor the side that can move with greater agility, not necessarily the one with greater weight. That is why his work appears repeatedly in the strategic thinking of insurgent movements, independence campaigns, and political transformations across modern history. Even outside military or political contexts, his influence expanded into areas that resemble competition more than war in the traditional sense. Business strategy, diplomatic negotiation, competitive sports, intelligence operations, and organizational leadership all found uses for his core insights. Wherever outcomes depend on anticipating opponents, managing resources, and controlling information, Sun Tzu's framework offers a way of thinking that feels immediately applicable. A negotiation table can resemble a battlefield of perception. A corporate rivalry can hinge on timing, secrecy, and market positioning. A political campaign can depend on reading public sentiment and anticipating the opponent's next move. In each case, the logic remains consistent. Success belongs not only to those who act, but to those who understand the conditions shaping action. Yet this wide adoption also creates tension. Sun Tzu's ideas are powerful precisely because they are neutral. They do not dictate morality. They describe effectiveness. That means they can be used to defend or to dominate, to stabilize or to disrupt, to protect or to manipulate. The same principle that prevents a costly war can also be used to win an unfair advantage. The same emphasis on deception that saves lives on a battlefield can also distort truth in politics or business. This duality is part of why Sun Tzu continues to be studied with seriousness. His work does not offer comfort, it offers clarity, and clarity can be used in many directions. Across centuries, rulers and strategists returned to him not because he promised victory, but because he explained risk. He provided a vocabulary for uncertainty. In unstable environments, that vocabulary becomes invaluable. It allows leaders to describe pressure, predict behavior, and structure decisions in ways that reduce surprise. Even when outcomes differed, the underlying method remained useful. Observe carefully. Think ahead. Act decisively when conditions are right, and avoid unnecessary exposure when they are not. In that sense, Sun Tzu's influence is less like a single line of inheritance and more like a branching network. Each era interprets him through its own anxieties. Each generation extracts from him what it needs most. The result is not a fixed doctrine, but a continuously reactivated way of thinking about conflict. And yet, beneath all these interpretations, one core question continues to return. What does it mean to win in a world where victory itself carries consequences? That question becomes even more pressing when Sun Tzu's ideas are applied outside the battlefield, where the lines between success and harm are less clearly defined. As Sun Tzu's influence spreads beyond armies and empires into politics, commerce, and modern competition, his ideas begin to take on a new complexity. The next chapter moves into this broader world, where the logic of strategy extends far beyond war itself and raises difficult questions about the nature of power, ethics, and the hidden cost of winning without fighting. At a certain point in history, Sun Tzu stopped being read only as a military strategist. He became something broader and more ambiguous, a language for competition itself. The shift did not happen all at once. It happened gradually, almost quietly, as readers from different worlds began noticing that the same principles used on ancient battlefields also seemed to apply elsewhere. The structure was always the same. Rivals competing for advantage under conditions of uncertainty, limited information, shifting alliances, and the constant risk of miscalculation. The weapons had changed, but the underlying dynamics had not. A modern office, for example, can resemble a battlefield in ways that Sun Tzu would have recognized immediately. Not because it is violent in a physical sense, but because it is structured around competition, positioning, and perception. Teams compete for resources. Leaders compete for influence. Organizations compete for survival in markets that reward speed, adaptation, and strategic foresight. In that environment, information becomes power, timing becomes decisive, and misjudgment can produce consequences far beyond what is immediately visible. Sun Tzu's framework translates into that environment with unusual ease. Not because it was written for it, but because it was written for the mechanics of conflict itself. In political systems, the translation is even more direct. Campaigns are shaped by messaging, timing, coalition building, and anticipation of opponents' moves. Success often depends not only on what is said, but when it is said, and how it is interpreted by an audience already saturated with competing narratives. A poorly timed message can undo months of preparation. A well-placed signal can shift momentum dramatically. Sun Tzu's emphasis on shaping perception rather than merely reacting to events finds a natural home in this landscape. Even negotiation, in its many forms, reflects similar patterns. Two sides enter a situation with incomplete information, different priorities, and uncertainty about the other's limits. Each side attempts to read signals, conceal weaknesses, and identify pressure points. The goal is not always destruction of the opponent, but the achievement of an outcome that maximizes advantage. In that sense, negotiation becomes a controlled form of strategic competition, where understanding the other side matters as much as asserting one's own position. In intelligence and security contexts, Sun Tzu's relevance becomes even more explicit. Modern systems of surveillance, counterintelligence, and information management revolve around principles he articulated in simpler form centuries ago. Know the enemy, conceal your intentions, control information flow, and avoid predictable patterns. The battlefield here is not terrain, but knowledge. Control over what is known and what is believed becomes a decisive factor in outcomes that remain invisible to most observers. This expansion would no longer look like armies moving across land. It would look like overlapping networks, political, economic, technological, informational. Each network contains actors attempting to anticipate others, respond to uncertainty, and gain advantage through timing and insight. Sun Tzu's ideas sit beneath these systems not as rigid instructions, but as a way of interpreting their behavior. Yet this expansion also changes the meaning of his philosophy. When applied to warfare, Sun Tzu's ideas are framed by an ultimate boundary, the presence of physical destruction and human cost. That boundary imposes limits. But when those same ideas are applied to systems without immediate physical consequences, the boundaries become less visible. Competition can become continuous rather than episodic. Strategy can become constant rather than situational. Every interaction begins to resemble a move in an ongoing game of positioning. This is where admiration for Sun Tzu begins to blend with discomfort. On one hand, his framework offers clarity in environments that are otherwise chaotic. It helps explain why some actors succeed while others fail under similar conditions. It highlights the importance of preparation, adaptability, and awareness. It reduces confusion by revealing structure beneath apparent randomness. On the other hand, it also reframes many aspects of human interaction as forms of strategic competition. Not every situation is naturally experienced as conflict, yet Sun Tzu's logic can interpret it that way if applied broadly enough. This creates a subtle tension between understanding the world strategically and experiencing it purely through that lens. In some interpretations, this leads to greater discipline and foresight. In others, it risks encouraging excessive calculation, where trust becomes fragile and every interaction is filtered through the possibility of advantage or deception. The same principles that can help avoid unnecessary conflict can also, when extended too far, make conflict feel more pervasive than it actually is. And yet, this duality is part of why Sun Tzu remains influential. His work does not demand a single interpretation. It describes a structure of thinking that can be applied in multiple directions depending on intent, context, and restraint. It is neither purely moral nor purely technical. It is analytical. It explains how advantage is created and lost without dictating how often it should be pursued. The enduring power of the art of war lies in that neutrality. It observes rather than commands. It reveals patterns rather than prescribing values. That makes it usable across centuries, but also open to debate across those same centuries. Ultimately, the question is not whether Sun Tzu applies beyond war. It clearly does in any environment shaped by competition and uncertainty. The deeper question is what happens to human perception when so many aspects of life begin to resemble strategic conflict. That question remains open, and it leads directly into the most difficult part of his legacy. As Sun Tzu's ideas move further beyond the battlefield and into the structures of everyday competition, their influence becomes more diffuse, more subtle, and more ethically complex. The final chapter turns toward that tension, exploring the uncomfortable boundary between strategic clarity and strategic manipulation, and asking what it means to live in a world where nearly every form of advantage can be framed as a kind of victory. Sun Tzu's philosophy was never neutral in practice, even if it reads as disciplined and restrained on the page. Once strategy becomes a way of interpreting nearly every form of competition, it begins to reshape not only how victory is achieved, but how people perceive one another. What was originally designed as a guide for survival in war can, when extended beyond its original boundaries, become a framework for constant calculation. And calculation, when applied without restraint, changes the emotional texture of human relationships. In its original context, the art of war operated under clear constraints. There were defined enemies, defined objectives, and a defined endpoint: survival, victory, or defeat. But as its principles spread into politics, business, and broader systems of competition, those boundaries became less distinct. Conflict was no longer confined to a battlefield. It could appear in negotiations, institutions, markets, and even in everyday decision-making. This shift introduces the first layer of tension in Sun Tzu's legacy, the line between understanding conflict and over-interpreting life as conflict. A strategist trained in his logic learns to look for patterns, weakness, timing, misalignment, uncertainty, opportunity. In situations of genuine competition, this is clarity. But in environments where cooperation might be more appropriate than opposition, the same mindset can produce a subtle distortion, the assumption that advantage is always the primary goal, and that every interaction contains a competitive dimension waiting to be exploited. That is where strategy becomes dangerous, not because it is inherently destructive, but because it is highly effective in environments where caution might otherwise feel unnecessary. Sun Tzu teaches that information is power, that unpredictability can be an advantage, and that perception can shape outcomes. These are powerful insights, but they also encourage a way of thinking in which concealment can replace openness and calculation can replace trust if left unchecked. This shift would become a narrowing of emotional space. At the center lies clear military necessity, where strategy is tightly bound to survival. As the circle expands outward into politics, economics, and social interaction, the same principles are applied in looser contexts, where the stakes are less absolute, but the interpretations remain just as sharp. The result is a world where more interactions are viewed through the lens of positioning. Yet Sun Tzu himself repeatedly emphasizes restraint. His philosophy does not glorify conflict. It seeks efficiency in resolving it. The ideal outcome in his framework is not prolonged struggle, but resolution with minimal cost. That nuance is often lost when his ideas are simplified into slogans. Win without fighting becomes attractive precisely because it sounds effortless, but in practice it demands intense discipline, patience, and self-control. It is not about domination in every situation. It is about avoiding unnecessary cost. Still, the tension remains. When strategic thinking becomes dominant, it can begin to alter how intentions are interpreted. Actions that might once have been seen as neutral or cooperative can be reinterpreted as tactical. Silence becomes ambiguity. Ambiguity becomes suspicion. Even honesty can be analyzed for hidden motives. In such an environment, perception itself becomes unstable because everything is potentially strategic. This is the paradox at the heart of Sun Tzu's enduring influence. He offers tools for clarity and conflict, but those same tools can generate complexity and human interpretation when applied too broadly. He teaches how to understand opponents, but in doing so, he also provides a vocabulary that can turn nearly any situation into a form of competition. The danger, then, is not in the existence of strategy. Strategy is unavoidable in any environment where decisions have consequences. The danger lies in its overextension, when the mindset required for conflict begins to shape spaces that might otherwise function through cooperation, trust, or openness. At the same time, it would be incomplete to frame Sun Tzu's legacy only in negative terms. His philosophy also contains a counterbalance to its own risks. The emphasis on preparation, restraint, and avoidance of unnecessary confrontation serves as a reminder that not every challenge must be met with force, and not every disagreement must escalate into struggle. Properly understood, his teachings can reduce violence rather than amplify it. That duality is what makes his influence so persistent and so debated. He does not offer comfort in the traditional sense. He offers structure, and structure can be used to stabilize or to sharpen, depending on intent. Across centuries, leaders, thinkers, and organizations have moved between those interpretations. Some have used his principles to avoid catastrophic conflict through better foresight. Others have used them to refine competitive advantage in ways that are less visible but more persistent. The same framework supports both restraint and intensity. That is why Sun Tzu remains difficult to categorize. He is neither purely a moral philosopher nor purely a manual writer of war. He is something more fundamental, a describer of how advantage forms under uncertainty. And that description, once understood, does not disappear. It continues to operate wherever decisions are made under pressure, which brings the story to its final turn, not away from strategy, but back toward reflection on what strategy means when it becomes part of the structure of human thinking itself. As Sun Tzu's ideas extend from battlefield necessity into broader systems of human competition, they begin to reveal both their greatest strength and their deepest tension. The final chapter returns to the central question of his legacy, examining what it means that a philosophy designed to end wars quickly has become a universal language for navigating conflict in nearly every form. In the end, Sun Tzu's legacy does not rest on the battlefield, nor even entirely within the pages of The Art of War. It rests in something quieter and more persistent, the way human beings continue to make decisions under uncertainty. The world that produced Sun Tzu was fractured, unstable, and shaped by constant risk. States rose and collapsed with alarming speed. Power shifted not through stability, but through pressure, military, political, and psychological. In that environment, survival depended on more than courage. It depended on perception. A commander who saw correctly, even once at the right moment, could change the fate of an entire state. Sun Tzu understood this with unusual clarity. His contribution was not simply a set of tactics, but a way of interpreting the hidden structure behind conflict. He treated war not as isolated violence, but as a sequence of decisions shaped long before armies ever met. Preparation, intelligence, timing, discipline, terrain, morale, and perception formed an invisible architecture that determined outcomes as much as any weapon. That is why his work survived. It did not survive because it glorified war, but because it revealed its logic. Across centuries, rulers and generals returned to his ideas not for inspiration, but for orientation. When outcomes became uncertain, Sun Tzu offered structure. When situations became chaotic, he offered clarity. When power became difficult to read, he offered a language for understanding it. His influence persisted because uncertainty never disappeared from human affairs. It only changed form. Yet the deeper his ideas travel, the more they invite reflection rather than certainty. On one level, Sun Tzu's philosophy is a discipline of restraint. It repeatedly emphasizes avoiding unnecessary conflict, preserving strength, and achieving objectives with minimal cost. On another level, It is a system for mastering competition so thoroughly that outcomes can be shaped before confrontation becomes necessary. These two dimensions exist together, and the tension between them is what gives his work its lasting complexity. It is this duality that keeps his legacy alive in so many different contexts. In military history, he is studied as a strategist of precision and foresight. In politics, he is read as a guide to timing and perception. In business, he is interpreted as a framework for competition. In each case, the underlying structure remains consistent. Success depends on understanding the environment more deeply than others do. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Sun Tzu's influence is not what he instructs, but what he reveals about human behavior itself. People act under incomplete information. They interpret signals. They respond to pressure. They misjudge opponents. They hesitate, overcommit, adapt, and occasionally see too late what was visible all along. Sun Tzu does not change that reality. He simply maps it. And in mapping it, he exposes how often outcomes are determined not by strength alone, but by awareness. That awareness is both empowering and sobering. Empowering because it suggests that outcomes are not purely random. Sobering because it reveals how fragile advantage can be when perception is wrong. Entire systems can fail, not through lack of power, but through misunderstanding. Entire campaigns can collapse not through weakness, but through misreading the situation at the wrong moment. In that sense, Sun Tzu's greatest lesson is not about victory. It is about attention, to see clearly under pressure, to recognize patterns without being blinded by assumptions, to understand when action is necessary and when restraint is wiser. To know that the most decisive moment in many conflicts is not the clash itself, but the decision that makes the clash inevitable or prevents it entirely. And yet, even this understanding does not bring final closure, because the same world that rewards clarity also rewards ambition. The same systems that reward restraint also reward speed. The same environments that punish error also tempt overreach. Strategy, once learned, does not guarantee wisdom in how it is used. What remains, then, is a kind of quiet recognition. Sun Tzu did not eliminate conflict. He explained it. He did not remove uncertainty. He organized how to think within it. He did not promise peace. He described how costly war could be and how carefully it must be approached. And perhaps that is why his work continues to feel contemporary, even after centuries of change. Not because the world has stayed the same, but because the conditions he described, the tension between knowledge and ignorance, action and restraint, strength and vulnerability, have never disappeared. In the end, the battlefield becomes less important than the mind observing it. And when the noise of strategy finally fades, what remains is a simple, difficult question that Sun Tzu's legacy continues to leave behind. Not how to win every conflict, but how to see clearly enough to know which ones should never begin. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, be sure to like the video, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe for more deep dives into the people, civilizations, battles, myths, and moments that shaped our world. Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Your perspective might inspire a future video. Until next time, keep exploring history, because the past is never truly gone.